It's part 7 of the neural tissue. We've had action potential in terms of the resting potential. We've had first the resting potential, then the active potential. We've learned about refractory periods. Here we're actually looking at membranes, and we're considering the nature of a Schwann cell, and that the conduction occurs from one end of the Schwann cell to the other end of the Schwann cell. Okay, so we have a naked region here, so to speak. We have a naked region here, so to speak. And then what we're getting is something called Saltidori Conduction, is we're leaping across the nodes of Ranvier here. This is called a node of Ranvier. And so we're going to go from here to here. It's because the EMF, the electromotive force, do you know if you get a magnet close enough to something, you'll eventually get the magnet close enough where you're actually causing that something to react to the magnet, either be drawn to the magnet or be repelled by the magnet. Okay, so electrical cords work the same way. There is a magnetism as well as a electromotive force, and you need to study a little physics, electricity, in order to understand the nature of those things. But nevertheless, it just should be, you should be aware that an event right here is going to affect the events here, and we're going to get a leap. That's going to actually increase the speed quite a bit. Here they're talking about speed in terms of fibers, different types of fibers. Let's take a look at group A fibers, mostly somatic sensory and motor fibers. They move at relatively high speeds. They're the, how shall I say, they have the largest diameter. They're running somewhere in the vicinity of 150 meters per second. And sometimes, if you figure out what these are, this is sort of translated over here to miles per hour. Group B, lightly myelinated, of the intermediate diameter, transmit impulses on an average of 15 meters per second. And then we have the group C fibers that are unmyelinated, and they are the smallest diameter, and we're moving more or less at about a meter per second for these. Okay, so that's an interesting detail right there. Then we consider the idea of the synapse, and we're going to press on here to consider the idea. Here's a big overview of the synapse where we have an axon terminal coming down, and we're actually going to meet up with another neuron, it could be, or it could be a muscle cell, or it could be a cell that has an activity that requires the action potential to open up a channel here. Okay, so what's actually going on is that we have the impulse coming down. You can see that there's an impulse coming down. There's the action potential. It's going to cross the membrane at certain locations, and in certain locations we're going to be having actually calcium present. And when the calcium channels get depolarized, or opened, shall we say, calcium is going to flow in, and as a result, that's going to cause the movement of these little vesicles right here. The vesicles are going to move toward the presynaptic membrane. This is called the presynaptic membrane. This right here is the synapse. Okay, we have a little fluid in here. We have the end. When these things reach this membrane, they actually, this, how shall I say, membrane right here is going to merge with that membrane, and it's going to open up, and the neurotransmitter is going to flow. The little green spheres here are referred to as the neurotransmitter, most common of which is acetylcholine. Here it's going to bind to a channel, and as a result of binding to the channel, we call this a chemically gated channel, we might get sodium to flow through the channel. If we get sodium to flow through the channel, then we might ultimately get an action potential, because that's how action potentials work, through the permeability of sodium. Okay, so the sodium could depolarize things right here. Here we actually see that we're metabolizing the neurotransmitter. In some cases, we might actually even return the neurotransmitter. Okay, so there could be something called reuptake. People are familiar with serotonin reuptake. Okay, so once you have something pleasant happen in your life, you get a little serotonin, and then the serotonin gets retaken up. In other cases, we actually get metabolizing or degradation of the neurotransmitter. Okay, in any case, we're going to be getting the graded potential as a result of the gated channel. Now, the graded potential could be positive or negative. We could be moving in a depolarization direction, or we could be moving in a hyperpolarization direction. Okay, there's one other feature here that I want you to be aware of, because it's a very common feature, is we use opiates in our medicine, and we also, if we have a very active and sports-filled, exciting, how shall I say, electrifying and enjoyable experience of having, maybe we had a soccer match, or we had a fast basketball game, we went dancing, we rode our bike for a whole bunch of miles, or we just went for a run across the landscape and the countryside, and we ran for, 5 or 10 miles or something. Usually what happens as a response to that is we produce opiates. In the body's own opiates are endorphins, or we could deliver opiates because we have a medical system that does that from time to time. Now, the opiate here is going to act upon this particular neuron, and this particular neuron is going to become activated, and it's going to release a neurotransmitter over here called GABA. And what GABA does is it selectively opens the potassium channels. When you selectively open a potassium channel, you're hyperpolarizing. If you were to open a sodium channel, like this is a bunch of sodium channels opening. Do you see it? This is the action potential coming down, and a whole series of sodium channels are opening, and we're getting action potential. But look at what's happening here is I'm blocking the sodium channels from opening, and instead I'm opening potassium channels selectively, so I'm selectively creating hyperpolarization here. Okay? And when I hyperpolarize, I make this stop doing what it's doing. Do you see what's going on? I make the muscle, if this is a muscle, stop doing what muscles do. If this has to do with pain transmission, I'm stopping the pain, or any sensation for that matter. So anesthetizing. And so that's how this system works. It's called presynaptic inhibition. It's how opiates work. We have a lot of, how shall I say, opiate little neurons that are set up this way for presynaptic inhibition. Okay, so you might want to review that, look at this a few times, and note how that's working. At some point, we're going to be studying all of the different neurotransmitters, or not all of them, a lot of neurotransmitter. There's no way to study all of them. But anyways, the same neurotransmitter works different ways in different places, right? So oxytocin in your brain makes you feel, empathetic and sort of like, all melty and happy. And but the same oxytocin acting on your breast will go, woo, and cause milk letdown, and acting upon your uterus will cause different kinds of things to happen there. And so there's physical as well as emotional outcomes sometimes of the very same molecule. We call them gut brain in some cases, or other parts of the body brain types of molecules. We'll get into that. Okay, so over here, where could it all happen? Here's the possibilities. Here we have synapses that act on dendrites, just the way you like it. And so we're receiving information. We've had some conversations over this area, and so we've become conversational, and we've hooked up some connections there, right? Every time we learn something new, we hook up new connections. That's what going to school is all about. Here we've created some connections directly to the cell body. Okay, this is called axosomatic synapses. This is referred to as axodendritic. Over here, we've actually gone to the axon hillock, which is still able to receive new signals, and we have axonal synapses. Okay, and then of course you can come all the way down here. This is a sort of axonal, but it's in the presynaptic position. Okay, so that covers all of your possible informations having to do with the synapse.